Our first one was pretty good. Yeah, it was pretty good. Because like everybody's, they make, I don't know, we have spirits, like we changed it, we have a spirits and really make one, and now we have like class chants, how everyone does. We have like sign parties to have. Yeah. Yeah, so ours is like, we're the best I've ever seen, we're the class of 2018. Like a lot of people are like, well, are the classes too low? Like
Shelby, send it to me. Best guy.
Good evening. Welcome to the Bossier Parish School Board meeting. Tonight we will have prayer report by Mr. Smith, prayer by Mr. Newman, and the pledge by Mr. Cheatham.
Thank you, President Darby. We do have several of our school community members that are suffering tonight. We certainly want to keep them in our prayers, both students and employees. We certainly want to keep Mr. Bullard. He's out. He's still ailing. We'll keep him in our prayers. And it certainly is wonderful that we can live in a country where we can stand up and recite the pledge and sing the national anthem.
Please bow your heads. Dear Heavenly Father, we just come today, Lord, and give you thanks for the opportunity for us to gather so we can make decisions by leading these students in this community, Lord. We just pray for your guiding hand upon us, Lord, that we may make decisions that are in the best interest of these children and bringing them up in this world, Lord. We just ask that you continue to watch over each and every member of our community, Lord, the military, the first responders, the private citizens, each and every one of us, Lord. We just ask that you watch over us, Lord. We ask that you please place your hand of healing on Mr. Bullard, and he gets better, and all those that are ill and could not be here tonight. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do we have any Bossier leadership in the house? Bossier youth leadership in the house? Okay, got quite a bit. Would you please stand and state your name and the school that you attend?
Brooke Smith, and I'm from Benton High School.
I'm Emily Sharp, and I'm from Halton High School.
I'm Brennan Balkhouse, and I'm from Halton High School.
I'm Victoria Vanberg, and I'm from Parkway High School. I'm Calvin Gadding, and I'm from Airline High School.
I'm Shelby Newman, I'm from Parkway. I'm Eden Newton, and I'm from Parkway High School.
I'm Ricky Ryan, I'm from Parkway High School.
And I'm Camilla Beck from Parkway High School.
We'd like to welcome you, and if you need any of these people on your right and left, they'll be glad to sign your papers. And again, welcome to the board meeting. Item 1.02, we have approval of the minutes of the regular session of the board for September 1st.
So moved, Madam President.
Motion by Mr. Wiggins.
Second.
Second by Mr. Cheatham. Please vote. Item 1.03, approval of the agenda for the regular session of the board for September 15, 2016.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Newman, second by Ms. Rutherton. Please vote. Item 2.01, tonight, we're sorry to say we have no recognition or presentation for this week, but stay tuned. We'll have some more for our next board meeting. Item 3.01, report from the Building and Grounds Committee meeting, September 13, 2016, presented by Dennis Bamberg, Chairman.
Thank you, Madam President. The Buildings and Grounds Committee met September 13th at 4:30 here. We had 4 items that required board action and another 3 for discussion only. First item with board action was the committee recommends Bossier Parish School Board amend policy KF, which is the use of school facilities, to state that any requests that involve the use of school buildings and facilities by movie production companies shall be reviewed by the superintendent for appropriate themes and subject matter and sent to the board's Buildings and Grounds Committee for its consideration and approval.
This is out of committee. Please vote.
Second item was the committee recommends that staff research options and pricing for artificial turf at football stadiums at 5 of the Bossier Parish School Board high schools, including Airline, Benton, Bossier, Halton, and Parkway, and the staff to seek funding sources for these projects with a report to the committee in 2 weeks. This was a unanimous vote.
Okay. Discussion. It appeared that Plain Dillon was not on there.
That is correct.
Okay. So, are we planning on putting Plain Dillon in there? Because, you know, they are one of our district schools. And we don't want to overlook them. They do have needs as well. Was it?
We do. I mean, I guess we can always revisit that. We're looking at. I mean, it was just an opening consideration to look at, Ms. Darby. You know, there's 150 kids in the high school there. I mean, we have to watch where we spend our dollars at. I think if it comes back and the money looks right, we can look like we could open that up for some consideration maybe at that point. And we may get consideration where we can't do the 5 that we talked about initially. But as I told the committee, it was just put the can down, let's kick it around a little bit. There was some thought process around that, but when the motion came, it just came to, hey, let's look at 5 football fields, get an initial cost estimate, and kind of see where we can find some funding for. If there's additional dollars, maybe we could approach that at that point.
Yeah, I would hope that we could look at Plain Dillon because, you know, they also have some needs that we've not met this year. So I would like for us to at least consider looking at them as well. Mr. Wiggins?
I agree with Ms. Darby. We can't leave it run out. I understand the funding is a problem, but at the same time, those students should have the same as anyone else. They're 150 to 75. It's a school. It is open. It's a high school. So therefore, if the money can be found, I think we should do what's appropriate for the rest of the school for them. Thank you.
Mr. Cheatham?
Yeah, and I think if we had an open checkbook, I think we would all be for all 6 schools having it. And I think one of the reasons and one of the things we talked about at the Building and Grounds meeting was, you know, the reasoning for getting the turf. It's not just for Friday night football, it's for marching band competitions. It's for lacrosse, it's for soccer, it's for all the sports that are gonna be using this at the high school and junior high level. I think when it comes down and we start looking at the dollars, $1 million for a turf field in Plain Dealing, I'm not sure it would get the use that we would get at our other schools. We're not going to have the marching band, the lacrosse. We won't have, you know, if you look at it, I just don't think personally that, I mean, there's a field's going to be $800,000 to $1 million, and they could. When they have events that rain out, that the field was bad, they could share bins and use bins turf in that case, like they do at some of the other schools in Caddo where they share and use that stadium turf. But again, if we had an open checkbook, we put a turf and we build athletic facilities and other things, you know, everywhere. But It's not that I don't want Plain Dealing to have something, I just think when you look at how much that field's gonna be used, how many different organizations and students, the money to spend $1 million in Plain Dealing just really doesn't make financial or physical sense.
I understand your statement, and I respect it, but we also need to keep in mind that Plain Dealing is not closed, and they've been a stepchild to all the other schools, and we've had some needs met in our other schools, and we need to keep them in mind as well. Mr. Wiggins.
Madam President, thank you. I know that the board members have the best intent in mind, and what you're saying is rational. I understand that. However, we are under something called a consent decree, a federal consent decree. If some of those parents, others who use that school, make an issue of this, they can stop it all. So I'm saying that if we can find the money, if the money's there for the other schools, we need to find the money for them, not for our Plain Dealing also. It's not a threat, it's a fact. So we have to do with Plain Dealing as with the rest. If it's 5 kids there, it's a high school still. So I'm telling you, we better give this serious consideration once we see what the funding is. Thank you, Madam President.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Madam President. I would suppose we're going to develop criteria for selecting the order. I would suppose that we're not going to do this all in the first year. So it's presumably a multi-year program. And we can not exclude Plain Dealing, develop the criteria, and probably Plain Dealing would be at the end of the list, both in criteria, size of school, rating, 3A, 4A, 5A. And then if there's money at the end of the list, when we get to the end of the list, we haven't excluded them, we just approached it based on objective criteria.
This is our committee. Please vote.
Item number 3, the committee recommends that the Bossier Parish School Board approve the construction of a baseball concessions, restroom, press box building at Halton High School to be paid from bond construction funds. Vote was 3-2.
This is our committee. Please vote.
Item 4, the committee recommends that the Bossier Parish School Board match the funds of $50,000 raised by the Halton High School Booster Club for completion of a ticket booth and entrance gate at the Halton High School football field. And this was unanimous.
This is our committee. Please vote.
We had 3 items that were for discussion only. The first was use of facility guidelines, specifically parking lots, outside paved areas, and canopies by fitness trainers, coming up with Camp Gladiator. We visited about it. We didn't really make any recommendations. We came out of there with no decisions made. I think we should put it on the next Buildings and Grounds Committee so we at least have a direction of where to move, how to move forward with this, and we're not leaving them Camp Gladiator in limbo either. Eric Newman moved that the committee recommend Bossier Parish adopt a use of fee for $150 per month for personal fitness training. Motion was made, there was no second to that. I think it was basically because there was so much unknown about the direction that we want to take. Move that to the next Buildings and Grounds meeting to have more discussion about it. Number 2, athletic facility needs assessment. Assessment of the Bossier Parish athletic facilities at middle and high schools is needed in order to rate their adequacy. We recommended that the superintendent ask for a detailed need assessment from principal and coaches at each high school and middle school about their athletic facilities, and then report back with the reasoning to come back to the board, rate the urgency of that project needed to be completed or needed, and then start moving forward with some of these projects. And so I guess we will have that. I don't know what the time frame, I'm going to put a time frame on that, but we had some discussion around it, so I assume maybe next Buildings and Grounds Committee meeting, possibly.
Well, I've already sent out the assessment needs list to the principals, to get with their coaches, to determine their needs. I think we can get that back fairly quickly. I put a deadline on that of next week, middle of next week. I think that will happen quickly. What will take a little bit more time is getting the approximate cost of each one of those items, but we're going to work with due diligence.
Okay. It may be something we can just look at the list without the cost items there and say, look at the pictures or whatever. Are they submitting pictures with their issues as well? I think that would be nice for the board, because if we don't go site visit, it'd be nice to see what those look. I mean, I don't know if you can send out an additional email so we can have some pictures to show at the board meeting. And then last, we had Clarence Babineau basically give us an update on land acquisition at Benton and all the other projects that were going on. And this completes my report, Madam President.
Item 3.02, request renewal of physical damage insurance policy for driver's education autos.
Thank you, Madam President, and Mr. Smith and board members. Thank you for allowing me to be here tonight. And I would ask you, I hope you all found the little packet I left for you up there. And on page 2 of it is the premium summary. And so I would like to just briefly remind that the board purchases this coverage because Red River Motor Company requires the board to insure the units it leases for driver education. All the other units the board self-insures, so this is unique to them. The other thing I'll point out is you can see the premium is up in my presentation, but it just depends on how many vehicles are on the schedule at any one time, because we constantly, well not constantly, but frequently endorse this policy to add vehicles and take them off. At the time of last year's quote, we did not have any vehicles picked up yet, so that was a minimum premium shown. This year we have 6 picked up, and so that's why the premium is different. But this is really a moving target, because this annual premium is based on the premise that all of those units would be insured all year long. And of course, that's not the case. This premium earns by the day. So that's the difference in the premium cost there. If I can get you to go over to page 8, I apologize for having to skip around a little bit. But this is the same insurance company that we've been with for a number of years. It's Great Lakes Reinsurance, and it's an A+ rated company. We still have a $1,000 deductible for comprehensive and collision. The reason why we don't increase it is there's no incentive from a premium point of view. We're already pretty much at a minimum premium on this policy. And again, it is for drivers and vehicles only. This particular recommendation to you is for 1 year only. We cannot get multiple year options on this, but I would recommend that the board accept the offer for 1 year from Great Lakes Reinsurance. Be glad to answer any questions.
Mr. Brockhouse.
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Rogers, have we got any losses here lately, or what's our loss ratio?
We've had some spectacular years where our premium is so low that when we have 2 or 3 fender benders, which is not uncommon, our premium is pretty much eaten up 100% a lot of years. This is one of those things where we use relationship, use the leverage of the bigger part of the account to get it done. This year, the most recent claims that we had were the hail claims. Cars parked at Airline High School were hammered, and then recently we had a back windshield, I don't know what you would call the back window, but it was broken as well. We thankfully have few accidents. We probably have as many comprehensive claims as we do collision. Yes, sir. Good question.
Mr. Newman?
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Rogers, am I to read on page 2 that the premium is $301,000?
No, sir. I'm glad you asked that. The driver's education physical damage, which is a separate, I'm showing you the total cost of the price of everything that I'm recommending tonight. It's $11,407.
So that in itself.
Yes, sir, that would be a very expensive physical damage policy, so I'm glad you asked that question and clear that up. And again, this is based on if we had all of these vehicles every day of the calendar year. And the coaches pick them up intermittently when the school year begins. They turn them back in, of course, as the semester ends, and then after the holidays, they pick them up again. And we usually have around 6, sometimes 7 at a time.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Mr. Bamberg?
That was simple. I guess I kind of have the same question, but is this for our drivers that vehicles total, including the liability section is the top and the bottom is the property damage?
No, sir, this premium is physical damage only. Only on the unit. So if they wreck them, if they burn up, flood, vandalize, that's all this coverage is for. And again,
Liability is covered how?
it's covered through the board's big policy. That will be my next motion, where it has the liability for all units, including the driver's education vehicles.
Okay, thank you.
The only reason we have to buy a separate policy on this is on the LSIG pool, it's a casualty program. So and you wouldn't want $100,000 retention on the physical damage anyway. So, but it's a great question.
Okay, thanks.
I'll make a motion, we accept the renewal based off of the insurance, based off Doug Ryder's recommendation.
Motion by Mr. Bachhaus, second by Mr. Slack. Any other questions or discussion? Please vote. Item 3.03, request renewal of LSIG pool, general liability, auto liability, and wrongful acts liability, including employment practices liability.
Thank you, ma'am, and thank you for the previous affirmation. Now, getting back to the question about the premium, Mr. Newman, the premium of $290,118, that is for all of the general liability and the auto liability, the school board liability, the employment practices liability, and of course, because of the business that we're in, sexual abuse liability. And so these are the coverages where the board retains $100,000. So when we have losses, the first part is you. That's not all bad because you're able to control the adjustment within that self-insured retention as opposed to the insurer just writing checks for us. Now on page 2, before I get into the rest of the coverages, we can accept this offer for 1 year. We're coming off a 2-year rate guarantee, but they have offered a 3-year rate guarantee. You can see the premium is up 1%, but that's because over the last 2 years, our rating basis has changed. So my recommendation later will be for the 3 years. If we can go over to page 3, I'm going to briefly mention some options just for your information. If there's interest of the board, this would be something I would recommend be discussed in an insurance committee. But you can see I've got some options there if we wanted to buy terrorism coverage. Okay. Under option 1 down there, property damage, that's actually for damage that might be done to your buildings or real property. That coverage number 2 is liability. Let's say if someone was successful in stealing a school bus, or if they came and we had a horrible act, as we've seen happen in some other schools throughout the country, and people were to believe that we had lax security, which would be a tall argument since we have school resource officers, That's what that coverage is for. And then the last is malicious acts coverage, and that's if we had a absolutely catastrophic occurrence. They help us manage that. And we talked about this, and about 5 years ago, 4 years ago, we actually purchased this 1 year because the LSIG board paid 50% of the premium. That was a 1-year deal, so we did not renew later. But all of these are just for your information. Sometimes people ask me, how much does it cost? Well, this is how much it would cost. So I'll move on unless you have other questions. This is really informational for you. Then the next page I would ask you to go to, of course, we can go through each of these detail, but the board purchases $2 million of coverage for any one occurrence, and that's pretty much across the board. And that is a responsible amount of liability, and based on what other schools purchase. When we go over to page 6, one thing I do want to point out to you is if this recommendation is approved, just like we did last year, there have been court cases where when public bodies reject uninsured motorist coverage, if the governing body did not specifically authorize the person signing the application to do so, they've been able to invalidate them. And so as I came to you last year, the cure for that, which is recommended by Arthur J. Gallagher's legal counsel, is the sample board resolution, which is on page 7. Again, we'll come to this, but I wanted to just briefly explain the reason why we do not buy uninsured motorist bodily injury is your attorney has recommended against it, and I don't think it's a good idea because within the structure of this program, you have one $2 million limit for an auto claim. It's shared. So if half of it is paid for an uninsured motorist claim, then only half is available for your liability. If you buy a personal auto policy or a more conventional policy, you might have one basket of dollars that's for your liability and a separate basket of dollars for uninsured motorists, where one does not deplete the other. That's not the way this is structured. So that's a little background on that. Lastly, because we've discussed it in the past, on page 9, I wanted to remind the board we were successful in having the pyrotechnics and fireworks exclusion removed. However, it's not rated. They're not charging you for that exposure because this board's policy has pretty much been, as I understand it, if the vendor doesn't have the appropriate insurance coverage, they can't do it. And we've met with people in the past. I haven't, one very specifically, the coverage just was not up to par. That's why I recommended we not do it, but I don't want you to wonder if you have the option. You do. I can ask them how much they would charge to rate that as an ongoing exposure, so it's really your administrative option on that. And then lastly, on page 11, that's the beginning of the AM Best ratings. I've already told you what the Great Lakes Reinsurance rating was. Our other coverages are with Ace American, and they're rated A++, which is the highest rating that AM Best assigns. So I want you to know that your program is deliberate. It's a broad program. We're not insuring every potential thing. I could spend all the money you would give me to try to make us have as little risk as possible. But it's consistent with what the board's philosophy of risk management has been, and it's underwritten by very financially sound carriers. And so with that now, I'll pause and be quiet and entertain any questions.
Mr. Kelly?
If the board's ready, I'd like to make the motion to reject uninsured and underinsured motorist bodily injury coverage from the automobile policy, and further move to authorize Mr. Frank Rougeau, Chief Financial Officer, to sign on behalf of Bossier Parish School Board to reject uninsured and underinsured motorist bodily injury coverage from the automobile policy.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Kelly, second by Mr. Masur. Any other discussion? Please vote.
Thank Thank you. And then the last question I would have is, if there are no questions, would it be the pleasure of the board to accept this option for 1 year, or would you like to exercise the 3-year option? The 3-year option would be my recommendation, just to lock in the terms we have, but we're not obligated to that.
Madam President, I recommend that we accept the recommendations of Mr. Rogers for the 3-year option as he's recommending. He has been, for the years, I've been here almost 20 years, giving us great options, great prices, and solid advice. So my recommendation is that we respond to his recommendation and do just that.
Motion by Mr. Wiggins,
Second.
second by Mr. Newman. Please vote.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wiggins, and it's a privilege to serve this board. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Item 3.04, consideration and discussion of board president and vice president selection process presented by Shane Cheatham, District 11 board member.
Thank you, Madam President. I wanted to bring this up for discussion and possible consideration for a motion. I believe 2 years ago we had 5 new board members that came into the board. And with our current process of how we assign our next president and vice president, that would leave one of those 5 new members going through their 4-year term without the opportunity to be president, and possibly even to be vice president. And looking around at some of our other parishes in Louisiana and our city council, the way they elect their president every year is members will put their name into a hat, and then we vote as board members. And I really think this is something that we should consider for our president and our vice president. That way that we're giving everyone a fair shot in their 4-year term. So along with that, what I would request would be that no one board member can serve more than once in their 4-year term, which is what we have now. My recommendation would also be that we notify the current president by the December 1st meeting for the end of the year if we want our name in the hat to be president or vice president. And then at the last meeting in December, we would vote at that time on who would be our next president and who would be our next vice president. I just really think this is, you're gonna have sometimes where if we continue like we're doing, someone might not want to be president. Maybe they've got some things going on at that time they don't want to be president, but as it is right now, you're kind of forced into that position. You might not even want to be in that position. Then when you have new members coming on, like the 5 of us did, one person, is going to miss out on the opportunity to do that while they're serving the school and the community. So I'll open it up for discussion, but I really would like to see us make a change to that.
Mr. Wiggins.
Thank you, Madam President. When I came on board in '95, that was a selection process. We would vote for the person to be president or vice president and so on. But later on, a few years later, it was decided to give everybody a better chance because some people stayed longer and got to be it twice. In fact, your brother served twice, if I recall correctly. It was a better way of doing it. However, I understand what he's saying and I can appreciate that. But it should be beginning in 2017, not 2018. I'm sorry. Whoever's currently set to go as president and vice president should be allowed to. And then the following year, if the board chooses, then begin the new process. It wouldn't be fair to people to change this in the middle of the spring. Let the people who are currently designated to be it next, certain time, and then begin the process on the following year. That's my opinion.
Mr. Masor.
The only suggestion I would make in having served as president in 2010, I don't mind the switch at all. However, the language in this type of motion, instead of it being one time per term, I would use a number of years, once in a 4-year period, for example. That way somebody in their 4th year would serve as a board president, and then in the next term, 4-year term, I was making sure I understood that correctly. It's not per term, but on a 4-year period. So it just kind of spreads it out a little bit and makes it easier. But in the past, we've never had the kind of turnover that we've had in the last election. When I got on the board, I think there were 2 or 3, and that was at the time I'm president. The only stipulation I would change would be the term, number of years, instead of it being based on a term, based on a number of years.
Mr. Kelly?
Thank you, Madam President. I think what's fair and what's been done for the last 20 or so years is we take turns based on a combination of seniority and then seniority and then taking turns. And so, to me, it seems that has served the parish very well.
Any other? Mr. Newman?
Thank you, Madam President. I tend to agree with Mr. Cheatham and as far as the opportunity for each and every one of us, because based on seniority and term and other factors that have played a part in the rotation, there are some people that might not even be considered for the president or vice president position during their term or during a period of time. And as far as, starting in calendar year 2017 or 2018, I think either way the sitting vice president will be affected the same way. I think starting this year, starting next year, starting the year after that, I think that vice president, regardless whoever it is, will still be affected the same way, whether it is 2017 or 2018. But I think it also gives the board the opportunity for individuals that want to be president and want to step forward and do the extra work, because as you know, it's no small feat to sit as the president and the vice president as well. It's also a job there. So there might be, instead of someone having to turn it down when it came just because it was their turn for the rotation, why not, have those people that are interested put their name in for it and have the board vote their vote of confidence for those individuals for those positions, because that is the face of the board and that is who we would be looking to lead us. So I support this, Mr. Cheatham. I think it's a good idea, and I urge everyone to consider it as well.
Mr. Wiggins?
Just like to one more time. I've served as president one time in 20 years because of the turnover. So he's right about the fact if you want to give an opportunity for others who may have a burning desire, like Mr. Trump or whomever, to be president, they'll have an opportunity. My only concern was that we don't change it for the people who are set to come on board this time, since it's already set. After that, I've got no problem, because it does open it up for, like I said, it hasn't rotated back to me again, and it will not probably. So I think it's okay, but just don't interrupt the cycle this year. Thank you, Madam President.
Mr. Kelly?
Thank you, Madam President. So Mr. Cheatham's recommendation is born out of his concern for fairness, that everyone elected for a 4-year term, so 5 of you came on in a 4-year term, and out of fairness to the 5 of you, you want an opportunity to serve as an officer of the board. How do you address those that are ahead of you, those that have been here longer, that have not yet? And how's that fair?
What did?
Mr. Newman?
Sorry, thank you, Madam President. Mr. Chairman, if I may, there's 5 brand new members. There's only 2 officer positions. It is a matter of putting your name in the hat. And if you want to lead and have that position, then you show interest and you show that you're willing to put the work in and you show all of these traits, then your fellow board members will recognize that and they will select you. I mean, it might be a fact of it's myself, Mr. Bamberg, Mr. Cheatham, Mr. Masura, and Mr. Kelly, Mr. Backhouse, Ms. Brotherton. There's 6 people, 7 people right there, yet everybody gets a vote and everybody chooses the one, and that is how that goes. So if it's new election cycle or previous election cycle, or people that have been here, veterans or new people, to me, that's irrelevant. If you want to do it, if you express interest, then you should be allowed to do it.
Mr. Backhouse?
Mr. Chief, bring a great scenario, because what's going to happen is now that we have term limits, we want to have more turnover, not necessarily board turnover, but more members leave at a time. And so if we have this again and we have 6 new board members come in, I mean, this next, I mean, if we served all our terms, we could have a brand new 12-member board here, you know. And so if somebody happens to come in and before then, they would be the veteran, and those other ones may not want to be the president at that time. You had one veteran left and really didn't want to step up and do it their first year being on the board. So I'm for it. I mean, I'm for the vote. If it's been working for police jury, council, and I don't know why it really changed back in '95 when it was before.
Oh, it was after 95. We were doing this in 95, but it's changed maybe around 2000, 2001, maybe about 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah. So that was my outlook, was looking towards the term limits and so forth, that when those come up, that you may run into.
Ms. Brotherton?
Well, I agree with Mr. Cheatham. You know, I don't think that you should be president because it's your term and you can't. If you don't want to be president, that's your decision. In my opinion, if you want to be president, you put your name in the hat. And we choose someone, we nominate them, and we get a vote. Everyone gets their vote. That doesn't mean you don't want to be president the next year, or what? There may be some reason you don't want to be president. So I think it's only fair. I've seen it work with other, you know, police jury for one thing. They do it that way. It's not always this, and the person that's vice president there doesn't always become president next year. They may not want it. So I'm just saying I think it's a good idea, and I agree with it. I do.
Madam President.
Mr. Wiggins?
Mr. Smith, is this not written policy that we did years ago to make this happen?
Well, I mean, it says policy now.
Right.
The way the policy reads, it's about BBA, ABE, the Bossier Parish School Board shall elect its regular meeting in December. One of its members will serve as president, and one to serve as vice president. The subsequent year, a board member who has previously served as president and or vice president of the board shall not be eligible to serve again in these positions until all members have continued to serve in this capacity. That's the way the policy reads at this time.
Mr. Cheatham?
Based off of the comments that I've heard and how I feel about this, I would like to make a motion at this time. I'd like to make a motion that for the 2017 and going forward years, that the Bossier Parish School Board elects the president and the vice president. Each president and vice president can only be elected one time in a 4-year period. And that on December the 1st, or the first December meeting, you would put your name in a hat. And then on the last meeting, the school board meeting in December, we would make a vote of those people that have their name in the hat. And if there was to be a tie in that vote, we would continue to vote until there would not be a tie.
Madam President, Mr. Smith, bring the policy again, please, sir.
We have a motion on the floor. Motion by Mr. Cheatham, second by Mr. Masur. Any other discussion?
Yes, ma'am. I'd like Mr. Smith to read it. Read that policy again, Mr. Smith, please.
The way the policy reads now, specifically, the Bossier Parish School Board shall elect at its regular meeting in December one of its members to serve as president and one to serve as vice president for the subsequent year. A board member who has previously served as president and or vice president of the board shall not be eligible to serve again in these positions until all members have had an opportunity to serve in this capacity.
We elect every year. But
Motion.
previously, if I may say this, previously it was changed that the person next, I'm saying, I have no problem, except I don't think it's fair at all to change the process this year after it's been in effect for the last 10, 15 years. It's not right. You do what you like, but it's not right.
Mr.
Bamberg.
Bamberg.
Thank you, Ms. Darby. It sounds to me like we're not making that big of a change, because what Superintendent read was it's elected out of people who have not held office yet. Is there anything about seniority or?
Nothing, no. I mean, that's just the first paragraph of the policy. The policy has to do with the election of the president and vice president. The rest of it has to do with procedures and so forth. But that's a part of the policy that has nothing whatsoever to do with what I just read. It has to do only with the election.
Right. I mean, it sounds to me like the only thing we're not doing is allowing members who have previously served to get in a position to be elected for those two positions, and we would be opening those people that have served more than 4 years ago to come back into the discussion for that. So I'm in support of it.
We have a motion and a second on the floor. Ready for the question? Please vote. Motion passes. Item 3.05.
We got an invalid vote. I don't know if we need to revote or.
That would be abstaining right there. And we would vote
Yeah.
invalid.
I've read this. Okay.
Item 3.05, request approval of trip request.
These are in order, Mr. Arthur.
So moved, Madam President.
Motion by Mr. Buckhouse,
Second.
second by Ms. Brotherton. Please vote. Item 4.01, announcements, superintendent comments.
I just want to quickly announce that the next meeting of the board will be October 6th, Thursday, October 6th at 6 p.m. here in the big auditorium. And just want to ask the board members to please notify Ms. Schwartz if you plan to attend, so you can make your registrations. I believe Ms. Schwartz you're talking about here. Yeah. And that concludes my announcement.
Now we're down to Mr. Slack.
Move to adjourn.
Motion by Mr. Slack, second by Mr. Cheatham. Please vote.